Before I start this video, I'd just like to say a quick thank you to 8-Bit Zoe for donating the awesome new audio equipment. As I'm sure you can hear, check out her channel here as she streams World War III, Insurgency Sandstorm and more. Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Since starting the channel, the time spent playing these old games and the research that goes into making these episodes has been a nostalgic and thought-provoking project. And I've even found myself uncovering games that I'd completely forgotten about or was even uncertain about having played in the first place, such as today's game, Spiderman the video game, which I did in fact play as a kid, as the memory of Eddie Brock emerging from that stasis unit, or whatever it was, came flooding back to me in a nostalgic wave of remembrance. Those who've been tuning in will know that I've mentioned my local arcade numerous times, and although it is merely a shadow of its former self, I will never understand why they felt the need to change it all. I did indeed play Spiderman the video game at my local arcade known as N1 City Wonderland back in the 90s, and even managed to find some old photos from the 90s of how it all was. Looking at it now certainly brings back many fond childhood memories, as my friends and I would beg our parents for money so that we could get tokens and proceed to feed them into the arcade cabinets like rats working a button on a food dispenser.
They stand like laboratory rats hitting the feeder bar to get a food pellet.
Those were great times. Back then, going to N1 City Wonderland was an experience, an adventure even. It was dark and noisy, and you could get lost in there for hours on end playing your favorite games, some of which I've already taken a look at and others which will surely come up in future episodes. Going to the arcade was a key component of my gaming education during my formative years, so needless to say I will undoubtedly be looking at many more arcade games for the foreseeable future. Spider-Man has always been a popular character in comic books, so obviously the next logical step would be video games, TV shows and so forth. But before the awesome animated TV show, before the popular collectible Fleer Ultra trading cards of the mid-90s, or even the live-action films we've all become so familiar with, there was Spider-Man the video game, released in 1991. So with this one I have to start with the visuals. Powered by the Sega System 32, they're heavily stylized on the comic books, complete with dialogue tags for the sound effects and what have you. And the colourful comic book stylings are reproduced wonderfully here, as both characters and environments look absolutely great. And the screen-filling comic book-esque introductions to each level look great too. A real treat for Spider-Man fans. There are numerous villains to contend with here, ranging from the Scorpion to Venom, Green Goblin and plenty others, all of which have been faithfully brought to life in exquisite detail. Of course, it wouldn't be a Spider-Man game without climbing, so there are vertically orientated levels as well, and most of the levels as a whole are jam-packed with plenty of movement that really brings the game to life. But perhaps the most interesting visual aspect, or perhaps visual mechanic, has to be the zoom effect that takes place periodically through the game when more things need to be on screen at once, or if, for example, Venom grows to the size of King Kong. Rather than just showing parts of him, the screen zooms out, giving you a wider frame in which to play. To my knowledge, there hasn't been any other beat 'em up that really incorporated such a mechanic, so if you know of one, please leave a comment below. I'd love to check it out. On a fairly odd note, just take a look at Spider-Man himself. Man, he's a bit weird looking, isn't he? And walks around like he's perpetually tired, like he's just left his office to go and get a really large cup of coffee, so that he can face the monotony of a desk job he gives zero fucks about. Or maybe he's suffering from some sort of back ailment or posture issue. Who fucking knows? It's just weird.
You don't know his life.
Apart from Spider-Man, you get to choose from 3 other characters, Hawkeye, Black Cat and Namor the Submariner. In terms of effectiveness, Spider-Man seems to be the best. I mean, it is his game after all, as he's capable of the usual flurry of punches and throws, and an effective web-slinging shot, which gives him a bit of an edge over his peers in my opinion. Oh, and as well as a web-swinging kick. Black Cat utilizes a host of kicks, punches and throws in conjunction with the whip attack, and bear in mind that these special attacks such as Spidey's webbing, Black Cat's whip, Submariner's electricity, and Hawkeye's arrows deplete your health every time you use them. While each of the 4 characters can dish out an assortment of attacks, fundamentally they all handle practically the same, as the game uses a 2-button system, one for jumping and one for attacking. Despite the relative simplicity of the combat system, it somehow manages to stay fun and engaging, as the overall gameplay is quite satisfying, especially in conjunction with the zoom mechanic that mixes things up a bit, as in the zoomed mode, the gameplay also switches from beat 'em up to run and gun style shooter, so in that regard, Spider-Man the video game had carved out quite an impressive niche for itself. It stands to reason that this niche compensates for the game's lack of pickups. Health pickups are practically all you get here. But I think that's a perfect compromise, as unlike a lot of the characters seen in typical beat-em-ups, Spidey and friends come with their own set of weapons and powers already. Among the countless bad guys you'll encounter along the way, the variety of the boss battles is a definite highlight of the game, bringing Spidey's impressive rogues gallery to life. I especially enjoyed the goblin battles. Spider-Man the video game is expectantly not a very long game at all. I completed it in around 47 minutes, and sure, you get tough arcade games. Hell, I can remember a friend of mine once telling me that they tuned the difficulty up of several cabinets to squeeze more coin out of patrons, but when it all boils down to it, every arcade game suffers from the same fundamental flaw, and that with enough credits you'll be able to overcome anything thrown at you by steamrolling the game with endless continues. You can literally just keep putting in tokens or quarters until you've won the game. Of course, at that point one needs to consider that the arcade cabinet has fulfilled its purpose. It's a bit like gambling. Actually, it's a lot like gambling. What the f***?
Later.
The only negative I could really find about this game is the music. It's pretty generic and forgettable, and at times even feels as if they just added the soundtrack of some other generic game that they had tucked away, so in that regard I don't think too much time was spent developing the soundtrack for this one. The sound effects and speech on the other hand are pretty good and fit the comic book theme very well.
Hey, don't you start that with me. Woo! Woo!
At the end of the day, Spider-Man the video game looks, sounds and plays great, and remains extremely faithful to its source material, and the inclusion of 4-player co-op only serves to make the game even more spectacular, much like Spidey himself. At the time of writing this, I wonder if that old Spider-Man cabinet is still at Wonderland, and if not, where it might have ended up. Sure, you can play the new Spider-Man on your PS4, and given its success I'm pretty sure it's great too, but regardless of that, Spider-Man the video game is still good today and definitely worth checking out.